Just because the older brother threw a rock at his younger brother, the younger brother's son stepped in to protect his dad. The reason this kid is so fierce is because the people of Yellowstone Ranch were the warrior's blood. That day, a herd from the Yellowstone Ranch wandered into Indian territory and started grazing on their land. The tribe decided to claim the cattle as their own. An old Yellowstone cowboy, hot-tempered as ever, crossed the border and demanded the cows back, but he was no match for the young, strong native men, and tensions immediately escalated. The tribe believed that any livestock stepping onto their land automatically belonged to them. At that moment, ranch owner John flew in by helicopter and arrived in person. After assessing the situation, his eyes were firm and unshaken. He wasn't afraid of the tribe. He'd already sensed something was off. There used to be barbed wire along the fence. Clearly, someone had cut it on purpose to let the cows wander off. "If you want to eat my cattle, then I'll show you the Yellowstone family isn't one to mess with." The next evening, the Yellowstone crew marched toward the border. They brought in all-terrain bikes, a strong cavalry, and John's helicopter. Land, air, and ground all deployed. The tribe was already waiting. All this, just because some cows ate someone else's grass, led to a full-on armed standoff. That's how unyielding the people of Yellowstone are. The Yellowstone Ranch sits on the vast plains of Montana, covering more than 3,000 square kilometers, making it the largest private ranch in America. It owns mountains, rivers, forests, thousands of cattle, dozens of powerful horses, and even a private armed force. John Dutton, the fifth-generation owner of the ranch, has influence over both the underworld and government. Even the governor of Montana is his lover. Every day, he flies his chopper to patrol the ranch. Protecting the land is his unwavering mission. Before the story begins, let's meet the core members of the Dutton family. John lost his wife in middle age. She left behind 4 children. The eldest, Lee Dutton, is honest and loyal. He's the most devoted helper to his father, but lacking business savvy. John decided he wasn't fit to inherit the ranch. The second son, Jamie Dutton, is the family's lawyer, smart, articulate, and ambitious, but a bit weak-willed and overly righteous. The third, Beth Dutton, is a powerhouse in business, bold, ruthless, and always able to strike where it hurts most. She can bring down opponents in just a few words. She's an asset to her father's business, but her impulsive nature makes her unreliable. Then there's the youngest, Kayce Dutton, a former Navy SEAL, calm and decisive, smart and capable. He's the ideal heir in John's eyes, but Kayce is rebellious. He disapproves of his father's shady dealings, left home early, married a native woman from a rival tribe, and settled on the reservation. John wasn't even allowed to see his grandson. The family also has a war god-level enforcer, Rip. He killed his abusive father as a boy, and John took him in. Since then, he's done everything for Yellowstone. He also has an unstable romantic relationship with Beth. Now, John is troubled. He can't find a suitable successor, and external threats are brewing. A developer wants to build a city on Yellowstone's land, calling it the Paradise Valley Project. It would not only take over part of the ranch, but also build a hydroelectric dam downstream, destroying the ecosystem. John swore to defend the ranch, but the experts said the river downstream isn't his. John couldn't stop them. Soon after, he got into a major car accident. While transporting breeding horses, a heavy truck slammed into them. He was forced to put his injured horse down, tears in his eyes. And the culprit? The developers from the Paradise Valley Project. John knew they were out to kill him. Looking at his herd, he sighed. "I've lost so much just to feed you." Meanwhile, the new tribal chief on the reservation also set his sights on Yellowstone. Educated, wealthy, and politically ambitious, he wanted to reclaim his ancestors' land. His plan was to build a casino nearby, inflate property prices, force John to default on property taxes, and then buy up the ranch. So at the beginning of the video, when the cows wandered into tribal land, that was the chief's scheme to spark conflict. John met with the chief, hoping for a peaceful solution, but the man flatly refused to return the cattle. A battle seemed inevitable. The former tribal chief Kayce's wife's grandfather came to warn Kayce. "Once the fighting starts, those caught in the middle will suffer. That includes your wife and child. So come home." But Kayce, stubborn as ever, refused to return to Yellowstone. The next day, John mobilized his armed forces. He wasn't just going to reclaim the cattle, he was going to deal with the developers too. Jamie, the timid second son, thought the move was too aggressive. Little did he know, this conflict would bring disaster to the family. Rip led a squad up the mountain with explosives. They dug holes and planted charges. Meanwhile, developer Dan was showing off blueprints to bankers, hoping to secure a massive loan. Suddenly, Explosions rocked the hills, sending up mushroom clouds. John couldn't stop the river, but he could reroute it with a blast. No river, no dam, no water, no power. Even if the city gets built, it'll be a ghost town. When the developer saw the dried-up riverbed, he nearly passed out from rage. At the same time, the Yellowstone troops reached the tribal border. The tribe was ready too, with tribal police standing guard. To John's surprise, his youngest son Kayce was among the cattle. He'd come alone, hoping to end the conflict. Suddenly, Kayce's wife's brother opened fire on the helicopter. Though they had the upper hand, John wasn't willing to risk his son's life over some cows.
Pull back.
Lee, unaware of the situation, refused to abandon the herd. The tribal police fired warning shots. John used the chopper's rotor wash as cover and ordered a retreat. The cavalry drove back part of the herd. Lee stayed behind to cover them, but when he raised his gun, he realized the enemy was his own younger brother. In that split second of hesitation, Lee was shot. The shooter, Kayce's wife's brother, moved in for the kill. Kayce flew in with a kick, saving his brother, then quickly checked his injuries. The man got back up fast, and so, to save his brother, Kayce killed his wife's brother with his own hands. The next day, the ranch sent out everyone to find Lee. When John saw his youngest son riding in, he instantly understood. He rode out alone to meet him. He told Kayce to ride his horse home. Then he carried Lee to the family burial grounds. He lifted him down, held him tightly. Losing his son at this age is unbearable, but this strong man didn't shed a single tear. Even at the funeral, he remained composed. He could only think of all the Yellowstone forebears, and how his own son had died before him. After the ceremony, Kayce didn't attend, but sent his favorite horse to make amends. He didn't mention what had happened during the fight. The estranged father and son barely exchanged words. One son was dead, and the other refused to come home. John led the horse into the stable. Only then did the tears begin to fall. Once his emotions calmed, his remaining two children realized this was when their father needed them the most.
I need you more than ever. You have me.
I'm not going anywhere.
News of the incident dominated headlines. That was the tribal chief's real goal, to pressure John through the media. Meanwhile, the police discovered Kayce's brother-in-law didn't die from fighting Lee. There was a third person at the scene. Kayce told no one, not even his wife. He couldn't bring himself to admit he'd killed her brother with his own hands. John had lost a son while trying to protect the ranch. Now, how will he reclaim what's his? Rip, the war god, showed up at someone's door. The guy had no idea what was coming. Inside, Rip heated up a branding iron and told Jimmy, "Once you're branded, no one will mess with you." Though timid, Jimmy gritted his teeth and pulled off his shirt. Once branded, you live and die as Yellowstone. The Yellowstone family treats newcomers with special care. John personally taped Jimmy's hands and feet to the saddle so he wouldn't fall off. The old cowboys gathered to watch the show. Only Jimmy didn't know this was the same wild horse Kayce had just gifted John. Even John couldn't tame it after decades of experience. That was Jimmy's welcome gift as a new Yellowstone man. But to everyone's shock, Jimmy held on for hours without giving up. By the time the sun set, the horse was finally broken, and Jimmy was completely drained. Afterward, Jimmy collapsed onto the bed and couldn't get up. He just wanted to shower later, but his roommate couldn't stand the stench and came at him ready to throw hands. The moment he saw the Yellowstone brand on Jimmy's chest, he backed down instantly. Turns out, there are two kinds of cowboys at Yellowstone. Those without the brand are just hired hands, but the branded ones are true Yellowstone men, not to be messed with. That day, while herding cattle, unlucky Jimmy fell off his horse, got injured, and lagged behind the group. Then he spotted a stray calf, also left behind. Despite the pain, he carried the calf all the way back to the ranch. That moment finally earned him a bit of spotlight and the respect of the old ranch hands. But someone got jealous. It was that same reckless roommate who hated Jimmy from before. Scrawny Jimmy was no match, and the guy didn't hold back. Even knowing he'd lose, Jimmy still fought back with everything he had. That scene caught Rip's attention, and the big brother finally stepped in to help. Rip grabbed the guy and slammed him to the ground like it was nothing. He pulled Jimmy's shirt open and made the guy look at the Yellowstone brand. Then he told Jimmy, "These guys are just workers. Don't be afraid. This is your home." That same night, the roommate was kicked out of Yellowstone Ranch. An old cowboy drove him to the train station, but once they crossed the state line, the truck stopped. They shot the man dead near a cliff, and his body rolled over the edge. The ruthless spirit of the Yellowstone people couldn't be tamed, not even by reservation life. One day, Kayce tried pulling out a tree stump. It was obvious the tractor wasn't strong enough. Even so, he forced it, The tractor flipped, his temper flared, and he grabbed an axe to hack away at it. Still not satisfied, he dragged out a whole barrel of explosives. He told his son to get inside the house, but the boy insisted on watching. Seems like the kid inherited his father's fire. Then Kayce used Navy SEAL tactics to blow that stump sky high. Unexpectedly, the blast uncovered a pile of dinosaur fossils, but what Kayce didn't know was that trouble was already on its way. The autopsy on his wife's brother soon raised questions. The governor personally summoned Jamie. The report showed that Lee was shot at vertebra C7. That kind of shot would have paralyzed him below the chest, completely unable to fight back, which meant someone else pulled the trigger and finished him off. That made people immediately suspect Kayce, though the coroner hadn't released a conclusion yet. Once it did, it would be handed to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the FBI, and the state police. Then the whole thing would blow up. Kayce and the entire Dutton family would be in serious trouble. Jamie reported all this to John, so John went to talk to Kayce himself, but Kayce had nothing to say. That silence told John everything. Kayce had executed his wife's brother. John had already lost one son. No matter the cost, he couldn't lose another. To clear Kayce of the murder charge, John had to take care of three things. First, 2 land agents had witnessed Kayce bringing Lee's body back to the ranch. John had to shut them up. One of them was the son of an old friend that would be easy to handle. The other he didn't know, but the guy was said to be a devout churchgoer, and the priest at that church owed John a favor from years ago. If a priest wanted a believer to keep quiet, it was a done deal. Second, he needed to destroy the medical proof that Lee was incapable of shooting back after being hit. The only way to do that was to make sure no one ever saw the evidence again. That meant John had to make a brutal decision. A strong man stays logical under pressure. He had Lee's body secretly dug up and cremated in the ranch's livestock incinerator. Meanwhile, Kayce was drowning in guilt. His presence had led to Lee's death, and he'd killed his wife's brother with his own hands. He felt like he'd failed both his family and his wife. The weight of it all became too much. He called his commander and requested to rejoin the SEALs. Heading off to Yemen, he told his wife, Monica, but deep down, some things might never be forgiven. His sister-in-law, unable to cope with losing her husband and raising 3 kids alone, shot herself. The gunshot rang like thunder. This land dispute had already cost too many lives. Back on John's side, there was one final thing he had to do to protect Kayce. Rip, the war god, went to the coroner's office. He never left things messy, and he never let the dead suffer. The coroner had a strange addiction, sniffing embalming fluid. That gave the DA the angle they needed. Label him as unstable. Claim he accidentally blew himself up. With that, Kayce's case was closed for good. John, though, still needed to get his cattle back. This time, he went straight to the courts, forcing the judge to label the tribal chief's actions as theft. There was no justice, no special land rights, and no law, only power and leverage. That day, the tribal chief was arrested while leaving the reservation. The result? The reservation quietly returned the rest of the cattle. The chief lost this round. Developer Dan wanted the Land Bureau to investigate John for altering the river course. But round 1 was over. John played every card right. He won. Completely. Yet, he was beaten and broken. His family was still in pieces, and there was still no one to inherit the ranch. He decided to sleep in the stable. Jimmy, battered from another hard day's work, happened to be there too. Their conversation was full of emotion. The once rebellious kid was starting to look like a real cowboy. His family was either dead or in prison. He wasn't much better. It was his grandpa who begged John to take him in. Now, it seemed like his life was finally turning around. John's rush to find a successor was because he was already in serious trouble. In broad daylight, Beth ran outside dressed like that. It freaked Jamie out. When Jamie didn't look away, she doubled down, tossed off her robe, and jumped into the horse trough. Jamie spun around, horrified, but the other cowboys were all watching. He told her to stop making a fool of herself, but Beth was as wild and unfiltered as ever. With a few sharp words, she had Jamie red in the face. Truth was, she wasn't really mad at him. She was furious because a woman had shown up. Montana's governor. That same woman had just spent the night with their father in their mother's bedroom. Beth was obviously lashing out at her. Their mother had been gone for years. It wasn't about a new woman. It was about today, their mother's death anniversary. John wasn't trying to disrespect his late wife, but for Beth, this day meant something else. She believed she was the one who killed her mom. Flashback to March 31st, 1997. Their mom took her and Kayce horseback riding. Kayce was great with horses. Beth, terrified. Their mother adored Kayce, but was strict with Beth. Beth hesitated at a fence. Her mother, annoyed, turned around to rush her. The horse got spooked. Her mother was thrown off, her head smashed against a rock. Kayce volunteered to ride for help, but their mom insisted on punishing Beth. She demanded Beth go instead. Every second counted. A little girl, terrified and crying, forced herself to find their father. She didn't know the way. It was far. By the time John, Lee, and the ranch hands arrived, it was too late. Kayce was fending off a pack of wolves. Their mother had stopped breathing. From that day on, Beth was never the same. No more crying, no more fear. She became sharp, ruthless, clever, cold to others, and sometimes downright cruel. She turned into the queen bee of Yellowstone. Maybe it's always the most broken people who try hardest to look strong. Her mother's death became a weight she could never shake. It made her reckless and self-destructive. Her big brother's death broke her again. Only with Rip could she be her real self. When she saw a pack of wolves tearing apart prey, she ran at them like a madwoman searching for her own pieces. Rip said she was the craziest woman on earth. She finally opened up about her feelings. She blamed herself for their mother's death, and felt she owed her father everything, so she swore she would protect Yellowstone Ranch with her life. One day, her father asked her to stay and not return to Salt Lake City for work. He gave her a new mission: run for state senator. Politics was never her thing. Jamie was the one built for that world. But clearly, their father didn't trust Jamie. John brought in party politicians to smooth the way. Beth ended up charming them with ease. Jamie could have run for attorney general at the same time, but their father picked Beth obviously to cut down Jamie's chances. Of course, Jamie wasn't happy about it. As soon as Beth finished the meeting, he came looking for a fight. They walked to the horse corral. Jamie complained that as the family's lead attorney, he'd already done so much. Now she was stepping into politics. What gave her the right? But he was no match for Beth's fire. She shot back that everything she did was for their father. Everything Jamie did was for himself. That hit a nerve. Jamie snapped and brought up their mother's death. That sent Beth into a rage. They got into a full-blown fight, but their father still sided with his daughter. John wasn't being cruel watching his kids fight. He was desperate to hand the ranch to someone truly capable. He had cancer, his days were numbered. His doctor was the son of an old cowboy. John didn't want anyone to know about his illness. He feared enemies would seize the chance to attack. He'd spent his whole life protecting the ranch. Though he had powerful connections, he knew once he died, no one might help his children. That's why he wanted one of them in office. But Beth's personality didn't fit the political world. She already hated the fake smiles of politicians, and now that Linnell had slept in her mother's bedroom, Beth saw her as the enemy. The governor helped set up Jamie's campaign team and even gave him a beautiful female assistant. Beth couldn't help but throw shade. She asked if the assistant came as part of the campaign perks. The governor saw her as a childish brat bent on fighting the world. She tried to pull Beth aside for a little lecture, but Beth wasn't one to be tamed. She fired back with venom. If you sleep in my mother's bed again, I'll destroy your career. And just like that, the political mission their father gave her fell apart. John was furious when he found out. He demanded she focus on protecting the ranch. The truth was, Beth had always been helping in her own way by playing with developer Dan like a toy. To her, men were nothing more than pawns. Sometimes the hunter shows up disguised as the prey. She first caught Dan's attention at a bar. When she saw he was interested, she turned up the heat to lure him in. She even went to his office to find him. A wild and seductive woman like that could throw any man off his game. Back at the bar, she flirted with a nearby tough guy. Predictably, the man ignored Dan and started hitting on her. Dan tried to intervene and immediately got punched in the face. But Beth wasn't someone random cowboys could mess with. As soon as the guy heard her name, he backed off and left. Soon after, Beth brought Dan more trouble. She was just toying with him. Dan hadn't even gotten anything out of it, and he'd already taken 2 punches. But for Beth, that was just the appetizer. Her former bank boss from Salt Lake City personally came to ask her to return. She was his secret weapon, a top-tier corporate killer. But Beth insisted on staying at Yellowstone. Still, she offered to help him acquire a local business, Dan's real estate empire. When Beth showed up again, Dan was instantly on edge, still bruised from the mess she left him in. Now all humble and nervous, he wished he could vanish into thin air. Beth didn't expose their past. Instead, she used her killer charm and fashion sense to win over Dan's wife. After a few drinks, the 2 women became fast friends. Dan's wife went home still buzzing. She even wanted to invite Beth over for a visit. The friendlier she got, the more terrified Dan became. He finally realized Beth wasn't flirting. She was setting him up for the fall. Beth's old boss opened a local branch of the mining bank for her. She returned to her role as a corporate powerhouse. Her assistant had already dug up all of Dan's financial secrets. Turns out, Dan had bet everything on the Paradise Valley project. Short on cash, he was selling company shares at just $3 apiece. That was Beth's golden opportunity. On the road, she ran into Dan's wife, now sporting a brand new hairstyle, clearly influenced by Beth. She saw Beth's stylish assistant and was instantly smitten. She invited him over for a wild time. They danced together at her house, and when Dan walked in, he nearly choked with rage. Dan confronted Beth, saying he'd destroy her and her entire family. Beth calmly replied that she'd be buying most of his shares the very next day. Dan stormed off in his car, blinded by fury. Beth was bold and fierce. She loved hard, hated harder, and believed every man around her was out of his mind. Her charm, savvy, and ruthless business skills made her the backbone of the Yellowstone Ranch. The future of the ranch depended on her. One day, a roadside explosion nearly hit Kayce and his wife. They got out to check. A man's legs had been blown off. His body was charred. He wasn't going to survive. He begged Kayce to end his pain. As a former Navy SEAL, Kayce had seen this kind of thing before. He knew burns were pure agony, but shooting the man would make him a murderer. Still, Kayce always followed his gut, and his wife supported his compassion. Fortunately, the police found the ingredients for making illegal substances in the rubble of the explosion. That meant the man caused the explosion while cooking illegal substances. That changed everything. The sheriff was thrilled. A major bust practically handed to him. He was more than happy to back Kayce's story. He even swapped pistol slides with him to erase the evidence. He told Kayce, "I shot that man. You were just a witness." What they didn't know was that this little cover-up would come back to haunt Kayce. One day, he was walking with his son on the reservation when they spotted a suspicious van. He wanted to call the cops but had no cell signal. He grabbed his gun, told his son to stay in the car, and approached the van. Sure enough, there was a native girl tied up inside, but his son had gotten out of the car. The van door swung open. Kayce reacted fast, killed the attacker, but the van sped away. As a SEAL, he couldn't let it go. He told his son to hide in a drainage pipe while he gave chase, but the pipe had a huge rattlesnake inside. The snake attacked the boy. Meanwhile, the van crashed in a ditch. The second attacker ran off. Kayce grabbed his lasso, ready to play cowboy. The man shot at him while running. Kayce threw the rope, but the guy tripped over a rock and died instantly. Kayce freed the girl. She was calm, almost too calm. When they got back, his son was sitting peacefully, holding the dead snake. Like father, like son, the girl started kicking the dead attacker like crazy. Kidnapping, attempted rape, 2 lives lost. They should have called the police, but the girl said no. Kayce drove her home. Her father was just as tough. That night, Kayce helped them bury the bodies and burn the evidence, but Kayce had killed someone. This cover-up changed the entire case. They could only hope no one would ever find out, but not long after, developers digging in the area uncovered charred human remains. Kayce was quickly arrested by tribal police. They solved the case fast because of the swapped gun slide with the sheriff. Turns out, Kayce had used the sheriff's gun to kill both attackers. The sheriff's gun had ballistic records on file, and murder with a buried body was a serious felony. This time, there would be no lucky breaks. The sheriff wouldn't be lenient again. Besides, the tribal chief had just been thrown in jail by John. This was the perfect chance for him to get revenge. Monica, feeling completely cornered, had no choice but to go to Yellowstone Ranch and ask John for help. Even though their son refused to return home, he was still John's flesh and blood. John immediately brought in the family lawyer, his second son, Jamie. To save time, he told Jamie to take his helicopter. The interrogation wasn't even over yet when Jamie landed like a boss at the tribal police station. Jamie's legal skills were sharp. It only took a few questions for him to find the flaw. The sheriff was left speechless. If he reported the gun slide swap, he'd be guilty of a major crime himself. Jamie suggested they switch the slides back in person, making sure the case had nothing to do with Kayce. The chief could only watch helplessly as Jamie walked out with Kayce. John finally got a rare moment to bond with his grandson. Both sons returned safely. As expected, the father and son who never got along said nothing touching, but a thought was already forming in John's mind. He used the excuse that the ranch needed a horse trainer, a job that used to belong to his oldest son. Kayce understood what his father meant. He said he'd train the horses for free, but don't expect him to work for his father. Meanwhile, the president of Montana State University arrived at the ranch. He wasn't looking for John, he came for Monica. He offered her a job as an associate professor in the humanities department, and a chance to pursue her PhD. The first year's salary? $70,000. Monica almost choked on her drink. For a Native American elementary school teacher, that kind of money was unimaginable. but she still turned it down. It was clear John had pulled every string to make it happen. His real goal was to get his son and grandson back to the ranch, and keeping Monica close was the only way to control Kayce. Unfortunately for him, she couldn't be bought that easily. Unlike her parents, the grandson was happy to be at the ranch. He thought everything there was better than home. Kayce refused, and the kid instantly got upset. Truth was, life on the reservation was tough. Kayce trained horses for others, but made barely any money. Monica's income was the family's main support. By the time Kayce finished his work, the sky was already getting dark. Under their son's constant pleading, the couple decided to stay at the ranch for one night. That night, John got to be a real grandpa, something he had only dreamed of. As he tucked the boy in, he told Jamie it felt good to have Kayce home. That night, while lying in bed, Monica said maybe it wasn't fair to deprive their son of the better life the ranch could offer. He loved his grandpa. He loved everything here. But Kayce still couldn't let go of his resentment toward John. Frustrated, he stormed out alone. When Monica went looking for him, she witnessed a new cowboy being branded flesh seared alive. The horrifying sight reminded her how brutal Yellowstone Ranch really was. Kayce rode his horse through the endless fields alone. At dawn, when he went to water the horse, he found a huge grizzly bear by the river. It looked like he was going to die today. In a split second, a gunshot rang out and scared the bear away. The shooter was none other than Yellowstone's war god Rip. These two had always been sworn enemies. Kayce hated his father, so naturally, he hated Rip too. When old rivals meet, fists fly first, words come later. Even though Kayce was a Navy SEAL, he was no match for Rip. Early the next morning, John prepared breakfast for his daughter-in-law and grandson with a not-so-subtle effort to get them to stay. After breakfast, mother and son returned to the reservation. At school, two students got into a fight. As a teacher, Monica tried to break it up. That single punch almost destroyed Kayce's entire family. When John heard what happened, he personally drove Kayce to the school, but Kayce didn't show the slightest bit of gratitude. At the clinic, Monica seemed fine after a quick bandage job. Back home, Jamie and Beth were waiting at the door. They had already found out about John's cancer. The siblings were anxious, but John just brushed it off, saying he was cured. They were starting to understand everything their father had done for the ranch and for the family. Monica returned home and looked fine, but the moment she stepped off the porch, she collapsed. She wasn't breathing. Kayce immediately started CPR. Monica's grandfather prayed for her recovery. That punch had caused serious brain bleeding. Doctors worked around the clock and performed brain surgery. She was finally out of danger, but since their son Tate had no one to look after him, he got into a fight with a nurse and was pinned to the floor. Kayce punched the staff member. The doctor immediately kicked both father and son out of the hospital. To make matters worse, the next day when he got home, someone had stolen the dinosaur fossils from his yard and ransacked the house. They already had nothing and now they had even less. The proud son of Yellowstone Ranch was now crying in a cheap motel. Even then, he refused to ask John for help. Until one day, John went to the hospital for a follow-up and happened to see his grandson. With John stepping in, everything turned around. The doctors became polite. The bills were covered. Someone watched the kid. John took his grandson back to the ranch. The treatment went smoothly. Soon, Monica was well enough to go outside again, but everything she'd been through had changed her. She told Kayce to leave her to leave the reservation. Maybe now, John's long-awaited wish would finally come true. They say every Yellowstone cowboy is a tough guy, but when a new girl showed up at the bunkhouse, they all turned into fools. As soon as she moved in, the whole crew followed her like lost puppies. She was bold and didn't mind the attention, but the so-called tough guys got all shy. Turns out, she used to be a stripper at a local bar, and all of them had been her customers. Tired of the nightlife, she asked Rip for a chance to become a free-spirited cowboy. Soon, the bunkhouse would have another new arrival. Kayce had been kicked out by Monica. He was in a terrible mood. While pumping gas at a station, a homeless man asked for $10. He said he needed fuel. Kayce offered to fill up his can directly, but the guy insisted he wanted the cash. Kayce wasn't in the mood for nonsense. When the homeless man didn't get what he wanted, he started cussing him out, then pulled a knife. What he didn't know was that he'd just picked a fight with a Navy SEAL, and Kayce had a lot of pent-up anger to unload. Too bad the guy couldn't take a hit. He didn't get his $10, he almost lost his life. Kayce hit too hard and ended up in jail. A few days later, the sheriff dumped him at Yellowstone Ranch. Now that he had nowhere to go, he had no choice but to stay. He knew this was exactly what John had been waiting for. At last, father and son buried the hatchet. Kayce refused to stay in the main house. He moved into the bunkhouse. Meanwhile, The cowgirl had already become one of the guys. When Kayce walked in, everyone was stunned. Was the bunkhouse this popular now? The only free bed was the one right above the cowgirl's. Elsewhere, Beth had fallen into depression again. She'd always been a timid child afraid of horseback riding. Now, in a sudden burst of courage, she wanted to conquer that fear. But once she got on the horse, panic took over. In no time, the horse threw her off. It was one of the ranch's new cowboys, someone who clearly knew horses well. He wanted to give Beth a horseback riding lesson, and his method was unconventional. Something in the cowboy's words clicked for Beth. The riding problem that had plagued her for decades was finally resolved. The cowboy's name was Walker, and Rip had recruited him right outside the prison gates. That night, Monica saw him getting branded. Unlike the rough, rugged cowboys, Walker had a poetic soul. Ever since that ride, Beth would stop by the bunkhouse every few days just to listen to him play guitar. The bunkhouse was more popular than ever. What Rip didn't expect was that he had unknowingly brought in his biggest rival in love. Walker had a gift for reading people and a rebellious spirit in his bones. He struck a nerve in Beth, and she kissed him hard against the wall. But truth be told, in Beth's wild and reckless heart, Walker was never going to be the cure. One night after drinking, she called her brother Jamie to pick her up. Jamie was reluctant, but he had no choice. On the ride back, they started arguing. As usual, he was sick of her recklessness, and she couldn't stand his cowardice. Then she pointed a gun at her own chin, wanting him to feel what it's like to lose family. Jamie didn't believe she'd hurt herself, only others. Lately, everything at the Yellowstone Ranch felt tense. It seemed like everyone was in pain. Jimmy was either getting beaten, tossed by horses, or laughed at by the rest. He nearly gave up. But an old cowboy encouraged him. Maybe everyone needs a phase of silent suffering before they truly grow. And once you've fully transformed, you'll be bulletproof. A group of Chinese tourists didn't realize that American land is privately owned. The guide brushed John off, saying coldly, "We won't go near the cows," then turned away to chat with his group. So John revealed his identity. The entire mountain was his private property. One older tourist didn't buy it. He refused to believe John could own all that land. That really ticked John off. Everyone quickly retreated from the fence line. In truth, John kicked them out because of the grizzly bear. The bear had already come close to attacking people several times. Yellowstone's war god Rip came to drive the bear away, but two more Chinese tourists wandered into the ranch. This time, they weren't so lucky. The bear got agitated and chased them to the edge of a cliff. Saving them was now the top priority. Rip threw a lasso, but it could only pull up one person at a time. The female tourist insisted on going up with her boyfriend. While they hesitated, she lost her footing and fell. They were deeply in love, so much so that Rip couldn't talk the man out of it. As the rope loosened, Rip almost fell, too, and the roaring grizzly was getting closer by the second. In the nick of time, he shot and killed the bear. The rescue failed. Driving off the bear turned into killing it. And in the U.S., a bear's life is worth more than a human's. Even worse, the sheriff arrived at the scene and claimed the whole thing was staged to cover up for killing two tourists. Rip laughed in disbelief. If Yellowstone really wanted to kill someone or a bear, when has it ever been this messy? But that didn't matter now. If the charges stuck, Yellowstone would lose its strongest enforcer. John desperately needed Jamie, his lawyer's son, but his calls kept going unanswered. The next day, wildlife officials came to inspect the scene. The lead detective was cold as ice. He even confiscated Rip's gun before they left. He treated Rip like a criminal. When Rip warned the female officer that a fly was on her horse's rear, she thought he was being creepy. Moments later, the horse spooked. The officer clearly didn't know how to ride. She didn't take his warning seriously. By the time Rip caught up, she was barely clinging to life. This was Yellowstone, 3,000 square kilometers of rugged mountain terrain. By the time an ambulance arrived, she'd probably have bled out. Rip called in John's chopper. They had to take her themselves, and they couldn't remove the metal stake lodged in her body. Rip dug deep, summoning every ounce of strength to rip the stake from the ground. She survived, but the killing of a protected animal was still looming, and John still needed a lawyer. But Jamie had been busy campaigning for Attorney General. His assistant had taken control of his phone and kept rejecting calls from John to avoid disturbing him. John was already on the verge of collapse. If the ranch fell, what good was Jamie's election win? When Jamie finally returned, John exploded in rage. Jamie explained he was too busy and his assistant had been managing his phone. That made John even angrier. He demanded Jamie withdraw from the race. Jamie lost it. All he ever wanted was to prove himself through politics, but in John's eyes, nothing mattered more than saving the ranch. John said he'd ask Linnell to strip Jamie of his candidacy. He told him to figure out what really mattered and banned him from ever stepping foot on the ranch again. That was the second time John cut ties with a son first Kayce. Now Jamie. That night, wolves devoured what remained of the bear. It was over. No lawyer, no evidence. The next day, the environmental agency sent another detective. John decided to defend Rip himself. He walked to where Rip had fired the shot. The sheriff insisted Rip was lying. John fired 2 rounds into the air. The shells dropped to the ground, yet there were no shells at Rip's location. John walked straight to the sheriff and found the missing casings in his pocket. Caught red-handed, the sheriff admitted it. Since the bear had been shot from close range, the killing was ruled self-defense, not poaching. Rip was cleared, but this sheriff was someone John had once helped into office. Now he'd betrayed him. John realized someone bigger was pulling the strings against him. He used to run local politics. He'd helped elect the governor and the old AG, but times had changed. He went to Linnell and asked her to revoke Jamie's candidacy. She refused, and instead demanded John resign as livestock commissioner. She said John had sent armed men into native territory, and the feds were investigating. He was facing civil lawsuits, and the EPA was after him too. As governor, she wouldn't let a public official like him be in the spotlight. This was the same woman who had once shared his bed. She turned on him in a heartbeat, but John wasn't the kind of man to take orders. On the outside, he stayed calm. Inside, he was boiling. Walking by, he saw Jamie laughing with his assistant. Clearly, his son had chosen a side and it wasn't his. John told Beth to cancel Jamie's credit cards and take his car keys. Just then, a scheming female reporter showed up. She promised Jamie that if he exposed his father's secrets, someone would guarantee him votes. Jamie's assistant had already seduced him. Now, with her whispering in his ear, Jamie, desperate to prove himself, actually went to the press and ratted on his own father. Now John was surrounded by enemies. His family was falling apart. The ranch was slipping away, and his colon cancer was worsening. He didn't have much time left. Now, the old cowboy had to strike back and hard. First, he asked Beth to move the ranch into the Schwartzmeyer Land Trust. Even if they lost the ranch, it would become a fixed asset, but he made it clear Jamie would not be listed as a beneficiary. Meanwhile, Beth began assembling top-tier lawyers to counter the environmental lawsuit. On the other side, Rip sent the female cowboy to infiltrate Paradise Valley's headquarters and eavesdrop on the tribal chief and Dan. Turns out, they were planning to invest $300 million to build a casino and a 400-room hotel right next to the ranch. Once people came, they'd build homes too. Time was running out and John didn't have much left. That day, Rip, Kayce, and the old cowboys ambushed developer Dan in the street, deep in the forest. They played a twisted game of old-school Western bounty hunter. Dan admitted the car crash was his plan to kill John. He revealed the entire scheme to take Yellowstone. Kayce slapped his horse. Dan was gone. For the first time in years, Kayce didn't go against his father. It was a sign he might just become Yellowstone's next ranch boss. And with that, Season 1 came to an end. I'm a movie enthusiast. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.